Every American president leaves a legacy, but for some, that legacy is one of failure, chaos, and irreversible damage. Who are the 5 worst presidents in American history? You've heard a lot of names thrown around, maybe even George W. Bush, maybe others. But today, we're diving into the real worst of the worst. These are the leaders who wrecked economies, blundered foreign policies, and left the nation more divided than they found it. The decisions they made shaped history for all the wrong reasons. And before you assume you know who's on this list, think again, because number 1 just might shock you. So what makes a president truly terrible? We're looking at economic failures, foreign policy disasters, domestic unrest, corruption, and long-term damage to the country. Buckle up, because this is a list you won't want to miss. Number 5, Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter's presidency was marked by economic struggles that shook the nation. Inflation soared to unbearable levels, reaching as high as 14%, while unemployment rates climbed to nearly double digits. Everyday Americans felt the squeeze as gas shortages left them waiting in endless lines at the pump. The country was in crisis, and Carter's leadership failed to bring stability. His foreign policy decisions only made matters worse. When the Iranian Revolution erupted, he hesitated to support the Shah, a U.S. ally, leading to the rise of a hostile regime. This directly resulted in the Iran hostage crisis, where 52 American diplomats were held captive for 444 days. To make matters worse, Carter's weak stance on global affairs emboldened the Soviet Union to invade Afghanistan, marking a major escalation in the Cold War. His presidency ended in failure, and his legacy was stained by economic disaster and foreign policy missteps. But Carter's influence didn't end when he left office. As an ex-president, his actions remained controversial. He openly opposed U.S. intervention in the Gulf War, even writing letters urging world leaders to reject America's efforts. He also played a key role in brokering a nuclear deal with North Korea, a move that eventually allowed the regime to develop nuclear weapons. His interactions with Hamas, a group with a long history of violence, further added to the controversy. While he was praised for humanitarian efforts like building homes for the poor, his political choices often undermined American interests. In many ways, Carter wasn't just a bad president. He may have been an even worse ex-president. 4. Barack Obama. Barack Obama entered the White House as a symbol of hope and unity, but by the time he left, America was more divided than ever. Racial tensions escalated under his leadership, with the Ferguson and Baltimore riots shaking the nation. His rhetoric and policies fueled the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, deepening the racial divide. Economically, his presidency oversaw the weakest recovery in modern history. While promising affordable health care, Obamacare's costs skyrocketed from an estimated $940 billion to a staggering $1.7 trillion, placing a heavier financial burden on taxpayers. Instead of bringing Americans together, his administration's policies led to deeper social and economic fractures. On the world stage, Obama's decisions had lasting consequences. He approved sending pallets of cash to Iran, a nation hostile to U.S. interests, while failing to prevent Russia's takeover of Crimea. His hasty withdrawal of troops from Iraq left a power vacuum that allowed ISIS to rise and spread terror across the Middle East. His backing of the Arab Spring, which was meant to promote democracy, instead plunged the region into chaos and conflict. Meanwhile, his administration was accused of weaponizing government agencies to silence opponents. The IRS was used to target conservative groups, and the FBI was embroiled in election interference during 2016. These actions eroded trust in government institutions and fueled political polarization. In the end, Obama's policies left the country deeply divided and set the stage for Trump's presidency. 3. James Buchanan. James Buchanan's presidency is remembered for one thing: failure to prevent the Civil War. At a time when the nation was on the brink of collapse, he chose inaction. Instead of taking a stand against slavery, he supported the infamous Dred Scott decision, which ruled that black people were not citizens and had no rights under the Constitution. This emboldened pro-slavery forces and further divided the country. As tensions between the North and South escalated, Buchanan refused to confront the growing secession movement. He believed the government had no authority to stop states from leaving the Union, a stance that only encouraged Southern states to push forward with their plans. By the time he left office, the nation was already breaking apart, and war was inevitable. Could Buchanan have prevented the Civil War? Maybe, but his inaction helped push the country into one of its darkest periods. Rather than using his presidency to unify the nation, he allowed divisions to deepen, making conflict unavoidable. When future presidents faced national crises, they made tough choices, some right, some wrong. Buchanan, however, did nothing. His failure to act when leadership was needed most cemented his legacy as one of the worst presidents in American history. 2. Lyndon B. Johnson. Lyndon B. Johnson's presidency left a lasting impact on America, but not in the way he intended. His Great Society programs promised to eliminate poverty and racial injustice, but after spending trillions of dollars, the poverty rate barely changed. Instead of lifting people out of poverty, his policies created long-term dependency on welfare. Government handouts replaced economic opportunity, and financial incentives discouraged marriage, leading to a dramatic rise in single-parent households, especially in Black communities. What was meant to be a war on poverty became a cycle of government reliance that continues to this day. On the global stage, Johnson's handling of the Vietnam War was a disaster. He massively escalated U.S. involvement without a clear plan for victory, leading to years of brutal combat and tens of thousands of American deaths. The war drained resources, shattered public trust in the government, and left a deep scar on the nation's morale. His civil rights policies also came with unintended consequences. While the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a major achievement, his broader expansion of federal power under the guise of civil rights set the stage for modern identity politics, where government intervention in social issues became the norm. What started as a push for equality eventually turned into a system that fueled division rather than unity. LBJ's policies reshaped America, but not for the better. His economic programs created dependence, his war strategy cost countless lives, and his expansion of government power changed the country in ways that still spark debate today. 1. Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson wasn't just a bad president, he actively harmed the foundations of American democracy. He believed the president should be the most powerful branch of government, dismissing the system of checks and balances. He pushed for executive control over key industries, expanding federal power in ways that reshaped the country. His authoritarian tendencies led to direct attacks on civil liberties, including the Sedition Act of 1918, which made it illegal to criticize the government. Under Wilson, press censorship became widespread, and political opponents were silenced. His economic and foreign policies were equally disastrous. He led America into World War I, breaking his campaign promise to keep the country out of the conflict. His approach to the war and the flawed Treaty of Versailles helped sow the seeds for World War II, as Germany was left humiliated and desperate. The post-war economy spiraled into instability, paving the way for a deep recession. But perhaps Wilson's greatest moral failure was his open support for racism and eugenics. He resegregated federal services, undoing progress made after the Civil War. He praised and screened Birth of a Nation at the White House, a film that glorified the Ku Klux Klan. He even supported forced sterilization of disabled individuals, reinforcing dangerous eugenics policies. Wilson's presidency left a dark legacy. His power grabs, civil rights abuses, and disastrous foreign policies had long-lasting consequences that shaped the 20th century. His vision of an all-powerful government set dangerous precedents, and his racial policies widened divisions that should have been healing. Few presidents have done more damage to American democracy than Woodrow Wilson. These 5 presidents made decisions that shaped America in ways we still feel today. From economic disasters to foreign policy failures and deepening national divisions, their legacies continue to spark debate. But history is never black and white. Was there anything redeeming about their presidencies? Some argue that their policies had unintended benefits, while others see them as outright failures. Now, we want to hear from you. Who do you think was the worst president in American history? Do you agree with this list? Or is there someone else who deserves the top spot? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a deep dive into history.